This is Apes on Tape podcast.
Welcome.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the podcast. If you're hearing this on Spotify, you'll notice the absence of Benji. This is my first solo podcast, and if you're watching this on YouTube, then it shouldn't be any different, apart from possibly an improvement in the audio quality. Today, I'd like to talk to you about a dream I had recently, where I wasn't in a wheelchair. In fact, almost exclusively in my dreams, I'm never in a wheelchair, but I'm always aware that I need a wheelchair. Like, oh, where is my wheelchair? Is my wheelchair close by? It's very common for people with spinal cord injuries to have dreams like this. And I just wanted to talk about how it made me feel and the thoughts that it provoked. So, for example, I met some celebrities in my dream, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Al Pacino, and for some, I don't know why they're not particular idols of mine, but dreams are dreams, right? They're very weird. So I remember meeting them, and them sort of they brushed me off, like I'm sure as they would. As you meet celebrities, you're almost always probably over familiar. I don't have a wealth of experience meeting celebrities, but I was like, hey, Arnie, and you're like, yeah, well, obviously you know me, but I don't know you. So he's just like, yeah, and I remember thinking, if I was in a wheelchair, would he have given me like an extra half a second? Would he have looked me in the eye a bit more? Would he have shaken my hand and sort of, you get a little preferential treatment sometimes when you're in a wheelchair. And I remember feeling slightly invisible. There was another experience where I was in an airport, and I remember thinking, man, if I was in a wheelchair, people would be getting out my way. I'd be jumping the queues. There's just this sort of, I don't know, a special treatment that you get. And the feeling of being invisible struck me. Like when I go to the supermarket, if I'm putting fuel in the car, for example, there are many things I do where people look at me. And when I first got injured, this really irked me. I was just like, would you stop looking at me? Just stop looking at me. But when people see me putting my wheelchair in the car when I'm driving, it's quite impressive. People do look at me and people do stare. And I remember thinking, if I did, if a genie came down, an all-powerful genie came down from on high and was like, I grant you one wish, and I say, I'd love you to heal my spinal cord, and then done, no need for the wheelchair, no need for the wheelchair toys, I wouldn't be part of the community anymore. There's an instant catalyst for connection when you meet other people with spinal cord injuries. And on that note, I'd like to give I'm really glad I remembered a shout out to Pete Harris, who I met in Southampton when I was there recently, and he listened to the podcast, he watches the YouTube channel. He's like, oh, I feel like I know you, and I was like, oh, that's so lovely, that's very kind. Anyway, my point is, we spoke for like over an hour. We could have spoke for 5. You have an instant connection with someone with a spinal cord injury because you go through so many different things, and I think, would I miss that? Would I miss being part of the community, like the Facebook groups? When people, there's just sort of like this whole sense of community that I would be ousted from. You're not part of our crew anymore, man. So it's an interesting point of view to realize, like, would I miss being being the wheelchair guy? I feel like I've embraced this identity. When I first got injured, I lost my identity. I lost my identity as a snowboarder, a mountain biker, a chef in a busy kitchen, a member of the community I was familiar with. But now I have a new identity. I'm the wheelchair guy. And it reminds me of the story of the guy with the terminal illness. I'll run through the story briefly in case you're unfamiliar with it. A guy gets a terminal illness. This is a true story, apparently. He gets diagnosed he has a year to live, and all of a sudden he is filled with joy, living every day like it's his last. He's very present every day, and for some miraculous reason, he beats the illness and he survives, and he carries on living. 3.5 years later, he's in therapy, he's depressed, he's got suicidal thoughts, and he wants to go back to the way he felt before. He really missed that. Now, there's a lot of things you can take from this story, true or false. I believe it's true. But I'm thinking, like, would I miss that? Would I miss being the wheelchair guy? There's so many things that I do like, for example, I went to a gig recently and I saw Queen, or a Queen tribute band, and I got wheeled up to like this elevated platform. It was like VIP seating. I was above the sea of people. I could see, people were getting out the way. Like, out the way for the wheelchair guy. And I remember thinking, before I was just a guy in the crowd. I was very invisible, and going from hating people like staring at me when I very first got injured, it was one of the things that it irritated me the most. I just like, people, would you please stop staring at me like you've never seen a guy in a wheelchair before? But I've come to embrace that identity so much that when I do simple things like shopping, driving, putting fuel in the car, people do stop and stare, and I know that they're like, ah, man, look at that guy, he's living his best life, just getting on with it. And would I want to go back to being invisible now I've embraced this identity? And it was just food for thought. Just thought I'd put it out there. I know a lot of people that listen to the podcast and watch the YouTube channel have spinal cord injuries, and I put the question to you: Would you? And I know a lot of people that suffer with debilitating nerve pain, chronic pain. If you have a higher up injury and you have to have like round the clock care, I'm sure the answer would be yes. Coming from a privileged position, I'm a low-level paraplegic, I'm very independent. When I go to play poker with my friends on a Friday night, I'm like, oh, how's your week? Oh, it's hot. If you're anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere right now, we're going through a bit of a heat wave, and people are like, oh, it's so hot, whether they're working in a busy kitchen or they're working outside doing manual labour. It's very, very hot, right? Like, so if I suddenly regained the use of my body, but would I have to put it to work in some sort of hot, sweaty manual labour job? Now I'm living a pretty privileged lifestyle. It's very hot. I'll have a little midday siesta. I'll have a little nap with a fan on me. And it's really nice. Anyway, it's just food for thought. I really wanted to hear some feedback from the audience. What do you think? Would you take some healing? I've been going swimming a lot recently, and even though I have to get lifted in and out of the pool, I've been swimming loads. I swam the length of the lake recently, which was and back, so that was an incredibly impressive feat. I was very, very proud of myself. But when I go to the lake, Ollie has to like piggyback me into the lake and out of the lake, and I remember thinking that people stare a lot. Of course they would. I mean, if people didn't look, I'd be like, what? Why are you not looking? Like, but people look because they're like, oh, look at that wheelchair guy. He's, his mate is piggybacking him into the lake. Isn't it cool that he can swim, without the use of his legs? Like, look at him swimming around. People look at me and like they're impressed by me. All the other people may as well be invisible. All eyes are on me. Again, something I used to hate, but would I miss it? And I think I would. And that's the insight that I had from this dream, that if I magically got healed from my spinal cord injury, I would suffer from loss of identity. It's exactly the same. And don't get me wrong, I mean, like, I suffered from an immense depression when I lost that identity the first time round. I had suicidal thoughts. I would do anything to not be the wheelchair guy. But would that happen again? If all of a sudden I was healed, would I be like, Genie, please give me back my spinal cord injury? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And let me know if you enjoy this style of solo podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, it might not be that much different. But yeah, Benji will be back when he stops ignoring me. Sorry, Benji, you're not here to defend yourself, but you know what to do to get here to, hey, I had a good excuse. Yeah. You know what he's like. So anyway, I think that's all I've got to say. So it's a short and sweet podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until the next one, love yourselves and each other. Peace.